Welcome to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Our podcast identifies issues that influence and impact the workplace and its continuing evolution, and helps answer the question, how will that impact my organization? The landmark class action antitrust lawsuit, House versus NCAA, is expected to restructure the landscape of collegiate athletics. On this episode of We Get Work, we explore the case, the settlement, and the potential long-term impact on collegiate athletic departments. Today's hosts are Bernie Dennis, principal in the Washington, D.C. office of Jackson Lewis, Danny Bland and Jason Kainer, associates, respectively, in the firm's Raleigh and Philadelphia offices. Bernie, Danny, and Jason, the question on everyone's mind today is, what changes will collegiate athletic departments be required to make pursuant to the House settlement, and how will that impact my organization?
Thanks, Alicia, and welcome everybody to this episode of We Get Work. We are in September. Students are back on campus, and college sports has started. So what better time to recap what happened this summer in collegiate athletics with members of our Education and Collegiate Athletics Practice Group. I'm Bernie Dennis. I'm a principal here in the Washington, D.C. regional office at Jackson Lewis. I'm joined here by two of our great associates in the Education and Collegiate Athletics Practice Group, Danny and Jason. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
I'm Danny, and I'm an associate in the Raleigh, North Carolina office.
Hey everyone, Jason Kainer here. I'm an associate in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania office.
All right, great, everybody. And there was a lot of action this summer on the collegiate athletics front with what has been commonly called the House settlement, the House versus NCAA settlement that was accepted by the courts in early June and led to a lot of action over the summer with institutions. And why don't we just kind of level set for everybody that's listening in? And Danny, can you tell us about kind of what was the settlement? Who's involved with the settlement?
Yeah, so the House settlement, as it's called, consolidates 3 antitrust cases that were brought against the NCAA, and it involves currently about 75 institutions who are members of the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, and then formerly the Pac-12, as well as the University of Notre Dame, so the PAC conferences, and then the University of Notre Dame, which is not tied to a conference. Institutions that will join one of these conferences during the term of the settlement agreement will be added to that agreement's terms as well during the term of the agreement.
And it's not just the power conferences, right? The other Division I institutions had an option to opt in and have an option to opt in annually as well. The initial deadline being July 1st. And then I think March 1st every year, schools that want to make a move or participate in the financial portions of this settlement have an annual option to do so. Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the settlement entailed? What are the details that listeners want to know?
Yeah. So the big number here is $2.78 billion, and that's the back pay damages, which are going to be paid out over 10 years. The NCAA is committing this money to current and former D1 athletes. It comes out to approximately $280 million per year, and the award of these damages covers the period from June 15th, 2016 through September 15th of last year. Now, the claims window for the current and former athletes to have filed a claim is now October 1st, so the beginning of next month. And the funding for this massive settlement is NCAA reserve pools of money, as well as some insurance compensation. So approximately $1.1 billion is going to be coming from those two sources, and then the remaining $1.6 billion is going to be derived from future reductions in these annual distributions that are made to the NCAA member schools.
Okay, so you've got the NCAA and schools pitching in on this settlement, and who's going to be receiving the benefit of these? Is it equally divided amongst athletes, or is there going to be some sort of apportionment with the settlement?
That's a great question. Obviously, NCAA sports, you think about football and basketball, men's and women's, as the primary earning activities. So within the fund, the payouts are allocated based on the categories of athlete experience and what's categorized as missed NIL opportunities. So some of the funds are designated explicitly for football and men's basketball, women's basketball, and then other pools for other sports. The detailed breakdowns of this under the plan are sort of in flux, but it looks like it's going to be $71.5 million earmarked specifically for video game NIL compensation for football and men's basketball. I know a lot of people love the college football video game. It came back for the first time last year. This is now the second year they've released it. A men's basketball game is also apparently in the works. An additional $1.8 billion is allocated for broadcast NIL compensation. Again, that is directed towards football and men's basketball. $89.5 million is set aside to cover lost NIL opportunities. That's cumulatively. And then there's a $600 million pool, which is going to be available for additional compensation claims. The distribution framework of all this, I know we just threw a lot of numbers at you. 95% of the funds are going to be dedicated to Power 5 sports, and it's going to be divided among football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and the other sports. 3/4 of it is going to go to football. Men's basketball will get about 15%, women's basketball 5%, and the other remaining 5% to the other sports.
Okay, so a lot of this settlement is lumped in what they commonly refer to as those revenue-generating sports, football and basketball. I'm sure there are people that are not happy about that, some of those other athletes, those other sports. Danny, have there been any challenges to this appeal over the summer?
Yeah, so there are several different avenues that people are going to take to challenge and have been taking to challenge this settlement. First, we saw in an executive order from the Trump administration, Save College Sports, that he wants to preserve what is commonly referred to as Olympic sports and those non-revenue generating sports. But that executive order doesn't define what revenue generating sports are. So it's a little unclear, but we should be getting some guidance later in September from the Department of Education on how he wants some of those things to be implemented. We'll also see some Title IX challenges to this settlement. So the important things to note regarding Title IX is that the case this agreement settles, those 3 cases, they have no Title IX claims underlying them. But anyone out there who thinks Title IX isn't going to come up is wrong. Under the settlement of antitrust claims, you have male student athletes who are anticipated to receive a good majority of the damages, probably over 90%, but female student athletes are anticipated to receive about 5% of the damages to resolve the antitrust claims. The important thing to note, though, for the schools is that, again, these are settlement of antitrust claims and not Title IX claims. So these past damage calculations shouldn't be used as, a tool to calculate future payments. It's not it's not listed as a Title IX compliant model because it has nothing to do with Title IX. These are just back damages for antitrust issues. And so that is something that schools will need to keep in mind as they figure out how they're going to make these revenue sharing payments going forward. And then you also have your antitrust challenges. Some people argue that the settlement itself, with the cap of $20.5 million for this upcoming academic year for the revenue sharing could be, an unfair restriction on trade. And then also you have the common class issues that you see in class actions, which is, whether the class is adequately represented and whether they'll receive adequate notice. So those are some of the issues and challenges that you may see in appeals to this settlement.
Great. Thanks, Danny. And I think, as Jason mentioned up front, this settlement really only covers 10 years. And so a permanent solution is not yet in place. And I think each congressional session, there continues to be legislation put forward. This session's no different. It remains to be seen if anything will ultimately be passed to provide some kind of surety. I know the NCAA is still pushing for a nationwide guidance on what those structures are going to be. And so that covers a lot of the back pay and how former athletes were harmed. But this settlement also covers some forward-looking relief to student athletes in the form of injunctive relief. Jason, why don't you tell us something about this injunctive component of the settlement?
Right. So forward-looking now, for the next 10 years at least, we have schools paying direct compensation to student athletes via this revenue sharing. So starting July 1st, 2025, so as of 2 months ago, schools may share up to 22% of their average Power 5 revenues with student athletes. The first year, this payout begins at approximately $20.5 million per school. So that's the cap in essence. And that'll increase annually through the next decade, projected around 4% annually each of the next couple of years. So it could potentially reach up to $33 million by 2035. We talked earlier, Danny referenced opting in, opting out. A great analogy I've heard is this is sort of like putting an ante in at the poker table. You don't know what's ahead, but you sort of need to do it so you can see what's coming over the next decade.
Right. So opting in will allow each institution to pay student athletes directly up to $20.5 million. We'll see how many schools kind of fully fund their programs to that maximum. And part of the settlement also is going to restructure how institutions staff and have athletes in their programs. Right, Danny? What's some of the settlement going to address with that?
Right. So first, as of now, we have 319 schools. So 82% of all D1 institutions have opted in. So this is something we're going to see across the board of all of Division I. There was some question at the beginning how many schools outside of these power conferences would opt in, but it seems like everyone wants to, be able to stay competitive, and so they'll all be kind of taking advantage of, there's this elimination of scholarship limits. So the previous headcount cap is lifted and institutions may now offer more flexible scholarship models. But there will be, on the caveat to that, some sport-specific roster limits. So, for example, a lot of times the roster may cut down below what we've seen the average rosters be in the past, but you can fund all of those players with full scholarships if you so choose. For example, football's roster cap is now 105 athletes, but there are teams in Division I who carried as many as 180 student athletes on their rosters. So now they can, they're not subject to those prior scholarship limits that were far below that 180 number. They can only now roster 105, but if they wanted to, they can fully scholarship all 105 of those athletes. So it is a huge game changer, especially with those top athletes.
So, right, Danny, you mentioned that there are going to be roster limits, and that's going to leave out, 75 to 80 football players, other athletes on other sports that are going to be, they have their roster spots cut by these roster limits. That held up some of the acceptance, the court's reluctance to accept this settlement, and the settlement ultimately addressed that. What does the settlement do for those athletes?
Right. So the settlement kept in mind the fact that there would be, this shift in rosters having to shrink, and that would impact obviously student athletes that are currently, playing their sport, potentially losing their spot. So a few months ago, was the deadline back in July to what's called designate a student athlete. And the idea was that you would essentially mark the athletes who are going to be cut if you were limited to the roster cap that is now in place. But that athlete is allowed to participate for the rest of their eligibility. It doesn't count against your cap. But then moving forward, it kind of gives, some leeway, a few years for this settlement and new roster sizes to go into effect, so that you're not really upending these student athletes, academic and athletic careers by suddenly just dropping this settlement on them. But it kind of gives a nice transition period. So these athletes who were rostered or recruited by April 7th of 2025 and were designated as of the deadline, they're exempt from counting against the new roster limits for the rest of their eligibility. So whether they have 4 years remaining of eligibility, whether they have 1 year remaining eligibility, the timeline follows the athlete as opposed to the school.
Right, and that designation will follow the athlete, not just in their careers at their current institutions, but should they transfer, they wouldn't count against their new institutions' roster limits too. So that designation was important for schools to get in by the deadline over the summer. And so with these changes, roster limits, direct payments to student athletes, there's still been grumblings about concerns about competition and direct, pay for play. How is this settlement going to be enforced, Jason?
Well, the shiny new oversight committee that's being rolled out is the College Sports Commission, the CSC. It's brand new. It's an independent enforcement body for all these settlement-related terms. The CSC was created and reports to the Power 5 commissioners rather than the NCAA itself in Indianapolis. So the NCAA will still handle enforcement for rules outside the settlement scope. But Brian Seeley, who's a former Department of Justice attorney and MLB compliance chief, he's now the CEO of this new commission, and he's being tasked with oversight and making sure that oversight is meaningful. The CSC is going to provide, compliance guidance, NIL deals, reporting requirements via NIL Go. They're going to administer the revenue sharing under this CAPS college athlete payment system model. They're going to manage roster assignments and enforce the arbitration protocols that are going to be in place. So overall, it's a comprehensive enforcement body that's going to hopefully bring some clarity to this system. Now, I mentioned NIL Go. That's a big piece of this. NIL payments for deals that are going to be over $600, those deals need to be reported now via this NIL Go portal. It's going to be operated by the CSC and Deloitte, a Big Four accounting firm. It's to confirm sort of the market value of these deals and make sure that there's some transparency. There are major enforcement questions here, so we'll see. This is, the first year it's going to be rolled out. There are also some questions about how arbitration is going to look under the CSC model. The arbitration they're trying to roll out is mandatory expedited arbitration in a very short timeline. We're all litigators. We know that's not always so easy. So we'll see how that goes. But there's a valiant effort via the CSC to sort of oversee this whole process.
With the CSC reporting to the conferences, I think they're trying to build in a little bit of flexibility and ability to respond swiftly to institution concerns and these power conference concerns, right? We did see a little bit of that already over the summer. At the beginning of July, the CSC has been rolling out guidance about how it's going to evaluate these deals. And it seemed to indicate that they weren't going to look too favorably upon the use of collectives by institutions. And I think those power conferences said, hold up, we've got this system in place. And within a couple weeks, the CSC guidance changed. And so we'll see if that's an initial function of this new governing body that is so flexible as its guidance is new, or if that's going to be continue to be something where they're going to be at the whim of what the power conferences want to do and how they adjust and how they go through things. And certainly as any challenges to deals or rosters or anything like that come up and we have these arbitration hearings in place, how quickly they can resolve that to everybody's satisfaction is certainly going to be an ongoing issue. And then, like you said, Jason, the NCAA is still going to cover things outside of this settlement, anything about eligibility issues and things like that. And so we've continued to see over this summer, just putting on a bow on everything, that there continue to be those challenges, right? Does junior college eligibility count against your time to compete under NCAA rules? Circuits seem to start splitting on that issue. And just recently, actually just last night, I believe, there's a challenge to the 4 and 5 rule and whether that's an antitrust violation. So there's, as busy a summer as it was, it's going to be continue to be interesting to follow sports this fall as competition ramps up. We've got one weekend of college football in the books with some exciting games and some exciting new athletes. But thanks for joining us. Feel free to reach out to us or a member of the Jackson Lewis Education and Collegiate Athletics Group with any questions you may have. And we look forward to assisting any institution with questions they might have as these things progress, and we keep an eye on everything.
Thank you for listening to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Please tune into our next program, where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice, including Apple Podcasts and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com.